Buenos días.
Good morning.
Buenos días, espero que hayan...
Good morning. I hope you managed to rest. We are here again to share this fantastic forum. Some of the people who are here with us today were not here yesterday, so I'm going to try and summarize yesterday's session and the fabulous contributions that we heard in the different panels. It was a very fruitful day. Many people have told me that they enjoyed all the contributions very much, and it was a very enriching and stimulating debate. We talked about the transformation possibility offered by local governments given their innovation capacity in public policies and development policies, given they are the administration that are closest to the citizens. It was proven that all municipalities and big or small towns share the same problems that are global problems affecting all, such as climate change or increase in inequalities. And in many places around the world, these big social and environmental problems are also translated into security issues and issues affecting freedom. In order to face them, there was a great agreement on the fact that there is a single voice needed, recognizing and sharing with mutual respect all the differences that exist, but also the importance of generating alliances between administrations and between the different public and private stakeholders intervening. The importance of relationships between Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean were also established, and they shouldn't be vertical. They should mutually be recognized as two sets of administrations that have a lot to propose and a lot to cooperate on. Also, the need to land at a global scale with greater precision the investments of the global gateway and to assess the progress they may represent in terms of welfare. Finally, the last panel expressed great concern on the democratic setbacks and the violations of human rights, and the need to reinforce the participation of civil society and society as a whole, to reinforce institutional relationships as cooperation and not competition. A very graphic expression was used. It is necessary to take care of democracy because democracy is a very fragile flower that needs to have constant care. So today we're going to tackle, in this first panel of the second day, the first roundtable on what instruments are necessary for local governments to promote the cooperation between European Union and CELAC. We have Boris Tannhauser as speaker, director of the Platforma European project, Richard Calderón, Mayor of Imbabura and member of the Congope in Ecuador, Marcela Petrantonio. Sorry if my pronunciation of the names is not right. Marcela Petrantonio, Secretary of Protection, Development and International Relations of Tandil in Argentina, and Vice President of Institutional Relationships of the Mercociudades Network, Mr. Sergio Farré, Vice President of the Working Party on Latin America and the Caribbean in the European Council. In the European External Action Service, Ms. Maklua, Head of Human Development and Digital Alliance of the Directorate General for International Partnerships, also from the European Commission, and Mr. Luis José Barcala, who is the Mayor of Alicante. So this is an excellent panel of speakers, so please keep to your times. I know you have many important things to say, but the program has this battle against the clock, and I would ask you to keep to your times. Thank you so much. And the moderator of this roundtable will be Mr. Tannhauser.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be here and to welcome this rich panel full of very focused panelists who will share with us their views, their opinions, possibly their suggestions on the context of the relations between the European Union and CELAC, including the views on instruments that can be used to support cooperation, to support development, especially at the local and regional levels in these regions. We have a few questions in front of us that we'll try to answer, at least partially, if not fully. You know, the context is that in the current financing period of the European Union, we have a specific instrument to support international development, which is called NDC. Global Europe is the tagline, so our Global Europe instrument is the one destined to support governance, to support decentralization, to support local economic development in the partner countries. In the recital, under the line of the recital, it says at least 500 million euros should be made available to support these processes all around the world. And of course, we have a new approach to use these instruments towards development, which is called Global Gateway. Global Gateway is the value-based offer of the EU, which should support fair, green and digital transitions around the world. And including in this instrument is also consultation mechanisms with civil society and local authorities. We have a platform which just met 2 weeks ago, where we as representatives of local governments, along with the civil society, have met the Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen to discuss how we proceed with this process. How can we be instrumental in the governance of these mechanisms so that we can support our partners, the partners at the local level in the partner countries. So I will probably give the floor to my panelists. Maybe I would start with you, Ms. Kluwer, as a representative of the Director General for International Partnerships, DG INPA, the European Commission, to give us your perspective on the process.
Thank you very much, Boris, and good morning to everybody. Potser començar amb donar les gràcies a la Diputació.
We would like to thank the Barcelona Provincial Council, but also thanking all the different entities organizing the event participating as well. From the European Commission, we're very happy to have spaces for dialogue in order to interact and work jointly. We had a very significant moment in July during the preparation of the Heads of State Summit that took place, and I believe that my colleague Sergi will cover this better than me, but there we managed to have spaces for dialogue of a more political nature regarding priorities, concerns, and recommendations of the different local authorities, but also very significant stakeholders as well in our work processes and by regional processes. From our perspective, there's many different spaces for collaboration. Political dialogue, but public policy dialogue as well, and a set of elements of work in terms of cooperation that we believe are there, existing and present with the cooperation that we have done in recent years, and perhaps we will have some time to work into greater detail. Boris, please let us know if we do it now or we wait for later until other speakers can introduce their own elements, and also in future collaboration elements in the framework of Global Gateway that brings forth a series of relevant opportunities for work, not only with the sectors we've already worked with, but also additional stakeholders, and particularly the private sector, and work logics from the Europe team, where we will mobilize all the different stakeholders participating in the Europe team, not only member states, but also stakeholders from the private sector, financial institutions and agencies and local authorities and civil society, of course, and other stakeholders as well. So in this context, it is a truly moving moment, not only because there's a true mobilization of important stakeholders, but there's a true will of partnership with all stakeholders in Latin America and the Caribbean to work together in the development of the Global Gateway, but also how we use it in all the different initiatives of the Europe team. We can talk about the geographic aspects of it all, but this in a nutshell are the great elements that are the base of our collaboration, and I hope they can be developed in the next period in order to get successful results and outcomes. Thank you.
Very much for this contribution, especially mentioning the partnership approach, which is quite a key for us as local governments, as we're used to work in partnership with different partners at the local level, with the civil society organizations, with the private sector, with local actors on the ground. So from other panelists, I would probably give the floor to somebody who would tell us a little bit more about the perspective of our partner countries, the countries from Latin America. Maybe Marcela Petrantonio to give us the perspective of our partners from the Latin America, please.
Ahí está.
Good morning, everyone. I would firstly like to thank, as Ima was saying, my network, the Mercociudades Network, and the Barcelona Provincial Council for allowing us to be here in such an important gathering. I'm going to firstly give a reflection, or some food for thought, if you wish, before we move on to the tools or instruments, a more macro reflection. What local voice are we talking about when we say local governments? Local governments are not all the same. The sizes and dimensions are different. I come from a middle-sized city called Tandil in Argentina, and precisely in Mercociudades, we're working very strongly in the identification of the voice of the smallest towns and middle-sized cities as well, and the voices of local governments. So this is here for the debate and for the discussion. When we talk about the voice of the local government, we should do it as a plural voice. They are the voices of the local governments. One thing is to have a capital or a big city, a big metropolis with all the different issues it has, and how that strategy of localization of the 2030 agenda, for instance, is very different to that of the smallest city or the middle-sized city. Those cities where local governments, with a political logics, with a management that is associated to citizens, define their own intervention policies in a way. Well, we talked about proximity a lot. The local government, that's something that is close. Well, it is very difficult to be close if we are San Pablo, just to mention a city in my region, or if we're Tandil, where civil servants and mayors are building public policies with the citizens all along, continuously. So this topic of the different voices of the cities did not come up, and I thought it was important to mention it. On the other hand, taking this as a reference or as a framework, and along these lines of taking care of democracy, as our colleague was just saying, and that Manuela insisted on yesterday quite a lot, so taking care of democracy. So what does it mean to be close to citizens? We should be, as civil servants, we should be concerned about understanding the weakening of democracies. We come from a region with weakened democracies in recent times. And you only need to look at TV. We were looking at what's happening in Madrid a few days ago, and this makes us wonder about some issues that also affect us. And having said this, when we talk about instruments, well, Mercociudades has a fabulous story of articulation with the European Union. 28 years of life as a network with around 400 cities or even more of the expanded Mercosur, of our great homeland, Latin America. And I remember a few years ago, perhaps Boris remembers it, the IN project, a project that allowed us to move forward in the region in what first was a decentralized cooperation observatory, and then South-South cooperation, which allows to have co-financing and strategic alliances between the different cities in the region that actually get to citizens, because the thing here is, how do we overcome with these instruments so that there's not only synergies between governments or synergies between bureaucracies of the organizations, but that truly citizens are part of those instruments. And therefore, and from this trajectory, track record, and experience that we have for 28 years as Mercociudades in our region, what we are asking our strategic partners, and we're actually very pleased with this alliance between Latin America and Europe, or the European Union, based on these fora since July, and this one we're working on now, is that the agenda that clearly is already there, the localization and how to mitigate climate change and how to work on inclusion, sustainable development. But how do we work on it jointly, all together? These asymmetries should not make us impose from power. So what is the agenda and what should we do? We need to work on this collectively as a group. So we celebrate these gatherings. We celebrate the fact that we're moving forward and give new significance to the decision-making process as an asymmetric region, because we are two regions with different characteristics, because of identities, because of our culture, finances. And the other comment is that when we talk about instruments, and in this well, instruments need to be for citizens. We are civil servants, all of us here, in a way or another. This is the role that we have chosen in society. But society is expecting a lot from us. So, under this umbrella, offered also by the World Network or Global Network of Cities, we are from Mercociudades, and in alliance with CGLU through the Hubs programs, which is a fabulous project in the Global City Network, we are developing a Fab Lab, a global observatory that considers middle-sized cities as talent places. And why am I talking about this specifically? Because this construction, which is what this hub is proposing, CGLU hub is proposing, is something that is being done in a city such as Tandil. We started work on this digital gap, taking two keywords into account. The first one is that there's no inclusion without education. Education is what helps us include each other, and local governments need to truly make sure that our young people, our adults who are unemployed, help them develop these skills, the skills that are linked to this digital gap, so that nobody is left behind. We have had a very interesting experience, and through this, we pretend to escalate it worldwide, and it is even more possible in these smaller-sized cities or middle-sized cities to develop these experiences than in bigger-sized cities. So this is all related with education as a way of inclusion that is so necessary, understanding that local governments have or play a central role in all this. And another key word or key message is work. We are hard-working people. I didn't hear the word work a lot yesterday. It's a bit insane, but I didn't really hear it. Dignified jobs and employment. Yes, we have it. We talk about this in our agenda, but beyond rhetorics, my colleagues, my neighbors, those who live next to me, in front of me, do they work? Do they have a dignified job? Do they make ends meet? Do they have the conditions that we are happily having? Are they integrated in society? I come from a country where 40% of the population is living in poverty. So it keeps me awake to think that these instruments, to honor the title of this panel, should truly include more work, more dignified work with a perspective of gender and diversity. But there's no single voice. There are the voices. So this is my contribution to this first part. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marcela, for outlining especially a few key messages that I think we should keep in our minds for the continuation of the discussion. One of them was really education, employment, and the general idea of leaving no one behind, which we know from the 2030 agenda, and this is the idea that we need to underline in the cooperation work that we do, but also the notion of weakening of democracy and the need to strengthen this part as local governments differ from many other actors at the local level through the mandate that they get from the citizens, the democratic mandate to organize local life and organize local development together. So further maybe listening to our partners from who arrived from far away to Barcelona, I would like to give the floor to Richard Calderon, Mayor of Imbabura and member of Congope from Ecuador.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation. I am the mayor of a province that is very diverse. 1/3 of the population is rural population, 25% indigenous population, 5% of Afro-Equatorian population. Most of them are women. The province of Imbabura has been declared a global geopark by UNESCO, and it offers a huge potential for tourism. It also is rich in mountains and lakes. It has all sorts of climates when it comes to growing a diversity of agricultural produce. And referring to the instruments to strengthen and promote EU-CELAC cooperation, well, I would say it's essential to fully understand the reality of each province. And that is why in Ecuadorian legislation we have land planning laws, which is a comprehensive part, which include also a participatory approach in decision-making in my province. I was the mayor of a small city. Now I am at the head of the prefecture. And from there I understand that cities will never be sustainable unless we strongly support the rural area. The rural areas are the ones providing food, energy, water, air, raw materials to cities. Not just in Ecuador, but also in a globalized context, it supplies the cities of the world. I was chatting to some farmers from Imbabura, and they were telling me that they sell avocados to Spain and France precisely at a time when other countries are unable to do so because of their geographical location. Chile, Mexico, and Peru are also large producers of avocado, but they're unable to produce because of climate patterns. That is why we have to think from a global perspective that our rural environments are not just supplying our cities, they are also supplying all urban sectors from everywhere around the world. So that is why we think that we must focus on our rural environment. Of course, we are concerned and want to improve agricultural production. We want to strengthen tourism. We want to protect the environment and do so we must count on the support of cooperation. In doing so, it's not just beneficial for our rural environment, it's also beneficial for our cities. It's not only beneficial for Latin America, but for Europe and the world as a whole. And listening to others, if we support agricultural production, if we support ecotourism and sports activities, we are also making it possible in the long term to overcome the social issues. It would help to contribute to improve family income and decent employment, and it would help to avoid one of the fundamental problems affecting the country, that is high levels of migration to countries in the global north. And there are many problems that are shared by many Latin American countries, that is higher poverty rates among women, even more so when we look at women in the rural environment. Another problem is youth unemployment. And if we look at cities and rural environments together, and if we support through cooperation, states and the different levels of government will be able to contribute to overcoming these problems in a structured way. I think it is essential for local governments not only to focus on cities, but they should also think that, in Ecuador, municipalities have greater competencies in providing public basic services in cities. So we need to understand the underlying issues. And I think I'd like to end on this note, and that is that this instrument, the land planning and development plan that includes social and productive agendas, these plans, I say, must be the basis when we define channels of cooperation, in this case vis-à-vis the relationship between the European Union and CELAC. This is our experience, and this is what I've learned after being a mayor and today as the prefect of the province of Imbabura, which has 470,000 inhabitants. It's a medium-sized province in Ecuador, and it represents a reality of many Andean countries in South America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, especially for enriching the discussion where we stepped further from democracy, from education, from employment, to important questions of biodiversity, of climate, food security, definitely migration. So we see lots of challenges in the region, and also vulnerable groups. You mentioned youth, you mentioned women, you mentioned diverse aspects of the need for development of the society. While we stay at the level of local regional governments, I would like to give the floor to Luis José Barcala, Mayor of Alicante, who is a representative of the Federation of Spanish Municipalities and Provinces.
Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the Barcelona Provincial Council and other organizers who've made this event possible, and to express the privilege it is for me to be on this panel and to address this forum. I am Luis Barcala. I'm the mayor of Alicante, a city on the Mediterranean coast, a medium-sized city. It's the 10th largest city in Spain. And I've accumulated several experiences. Alicante is, we could say, a large city, but at the same time with elements of a smaller size city. You must forgive me. Yesterday I wasn't able to attend, and I may repeat some things that have already been said. And that's good, because it means we agree on these issues. But I also hope to contribute new ideas. For me, the most important thing in a forum like today's is to come up with a set of basic ideas. Since the COVID pandemic, what we have seen is how important local governments are when it comes to management, and more specifically when you've had events that have affected the world globally. Local administrations have been the ones that have been at the front dealing with our citizens' concerns, and that is where we saw what we always say, and that is that the local administration is the one closest to our citizens. So the opportunity that came with the pandemic show how important local governments are. It's something we have to believe in. That is our role in the future. We are not the small brother of other administrations, neither national nor regional or administrations. We have our own identity and we have our own role. We don't replace or step in for others. We are complementary, and this is something that must be recognized. We must recognize the specific role of local administrations and their own identity. Starting off from this basic idea, we will then be able to look at the distinctive features of local authorities and the instruments that we can use for collaboration. It'll allow us to see where we can reclaim our own protagonist role. Closeness and reacting immediately, I think this is a common feature for all municipalities and city councils. There's one point I like to highlight, and that is that local administrations are the ones where there's less politicization and more pragmatism. If there's a missing lamppost, or if a neighbor is asking for a bench, or if you have to tarmac a road, there's little ideological load there, but there's a lot of practicity. And that is what our neighbors are concerned about. There are obviously bigger issues at play here too, but we are an administration where we have to focus on practical matters more than on political matters. And I think this plays in our favor. The type of management is more human, more personal, and we are the first who can detect what people need, and we are the best equipped in dealing with our citizens' concerns. We have an immediate and direct knowledge of the issues affecting our society, and we have thousands of years of experience solving these issues. Local administrations are the ones that can adapt more quickly to any circumstance at any time. Today, I can receive a warning. Let's say we get a weather warning of torrential rains for tomorrow. I have to be ready for those torrential rains. And I have to deal with the emergencies that pop up on a daily basis, and I do this from a municipal level. We have our own resources, but we rely too much on resources being transferred, and these transfers of resources aren't allocated in an objective manner. And last but not least, there is another very important element to highlight in this forum, which will be useful when we talk of instruments, and that is we need similarity of the legal frameworks under which public administrations are working in Europe and in Latin America and the Caribbean. We all follow continental law. And I think local administrations are the ones that share greatest similarities when it comes to the legal and administrative tools we work with. This is important. It reduces the differences that may exist between the different states we all come from. And instruments will be a consequence of promoting these joint characteristics. Local language, the language we speak locally, is something we have to promote. We have to share local language that is transnational and it is shared by us all. And this is thanks to what I mentioned before. We all speak the same language because we all speak to solve the same problems. even if a colleague from Argentina said cities are different. Of course they are, and towns are different, obviously. But we always talk the same language. I'm from Alicante, the 10th largest city in Spain, but I go from home to the city council on foot every day. I walk to work every day. And from home to the city council, it's 800 meters. And on average, it takes me 2 hours to reach my office because I stop and chat to people, because people know that I am there for them, not only in my office, but also out in the streets. And this is something we all share. Networking, for me, networking is essential. We need networks, not just in broad fora like these, but also more specific networks. That is where we will be dealing with the different needs of the municipalities and local administrations. There may be municipalities where the environmental ecosystem is really important, and there will be other municipalities where solving the issues stemming from excessively urban ecosystem are the problem. But I'm sure both can come together and share experiences. Working in networks is essential. Then exchanging on technologies is also essential. Right now, the City Council of Alicante is pushing for the implementation of artificial intelligence and predictive processes that allow me to come up with models on what will happen if I have to do roadworks and cut off the traffic. Where should the bus go in order to create the less disturbance to our citizens? I mean, these are the things that we have to deal with every day. And using new technologies and the development of new technologies, investing funds are essential. It guarantees two things or three things. They contribute to efficiency, efficacy, and transparency. Transparency is really important. We are directly accountable to our citizens. They see us out in the streets, and we cannot lie. The fight against corruption, we have to battle the misuse of public funds because of illicit acts or because of being negligent. So applying new technologies allow us to keep all of this under control. We also have to exchange on legal and administrative instruments. We share many similarities. I think we, as part of this network, can exchange and learn from the ways in which we've been able to overcome problems. Doing advocacy and cooperation policies, as I said before, we're not minors. We're not the little brother. We don't need a guardianship. We need a specific space where we can develop our projects and cooperate and come up with cooperation policies among administrations. And we have this framework of competences has to be clearly delimited. Local administrations, the problem we are faced with, at least here in Spain, is that we do not hold responsibilities and the competencies for this, but we do have to do things that others should do. It's the others who have the competencies and they ask us to do it. They say that they pay us to do this, but we have to carry the burden of what others aren't doing. But we don't participate in decision-making. We're only doing the job for them, and that is unfair. And last but not least, we mentioned public-private partnership. We cannot do this alone. We cannot do this alone. The administration has a role to play, and the administration should guide and design. But when it comes to the implementation phase, we cannot do this alone. A, because we don't all have the same amount of resources, and the resources we have will always be insufficient. So what we have to solve isn't just our own problem, it's a shared problem. So having the opportunity to exchange is fundamental. Having the opportunity to collaborate and count on the private sector whether it's individuals through public participation or be it through enterprises and freelancers or anyone who can contribute from the private sector, I think is fundamental. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I think you underlined already very specific and concrete instruments that exist. And you started with the same language, and I'm sure you didn't mean Spanish or Castellano. You meant the language of local governments, the language of the needs of the local population, the language of providing local services wherever we are in the world, the language of local democracy, transparency, and good governance at the local level. So this is an important tool for development. We do also have a common language, the language of development, the language of the 2030 Agenda, the language of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are common for all of us. So this is a very solid base to start cooperate. And of course, last but not least, the essential tool for cooperation is the city-to-city partnerships and city networks that allow us to share experience, that allow us to meet, to discuss challenges and find common solutions. And yesterday we talked a lot about forgetting competition, but instead claiming a common space for local governments all around the world. So this is really quite an important contributions. And now, last but not least, the European Union is also present all around the world, especially through its European External Action Service and European Union delegations. So I would like to give the floor to the representative of the EAS, the External Action Service, Mr. Sergi Farek, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Boris. Y moltes gràcies. Me sumo al agradecimiento.
I'd like to echo the congratulations to the Barcelona Provincial Council. I can remember other times where I've been at fora like these, but from a completely different geographical location, or when I was at the Union for the Mediterranean, and we made big steps forward in terms of local governance. In a few days, there's a very important summit being held here in the city of Barcelona with the backdrop of a serious conflict, which we all know. I'm referring to this, trying and not repeat things that have been said already. Please feel free to interrupt me if I'm repeating things that have already been said, but perhaps the added value I can bring to the conversation is connecting two worlds that we separate artificially. We talked about the summit of heads of state and government, which is in the concept note of this meeting, but at the end of the day, it's an artificial division. We talk of geopolitical conflicts, Ukraine and Russia since February last year, which have strongly impacted the global agenda. Now, unfortunately, since October the 7th, we are talking of the war in the Gaza Strip. And we say, well, there are ministers, heads of government, and as the mayor said and others said, I mean, it's an honor. We have 3 elected representatives. We are civil servants, Emma and I, and we have 3 elected representatives who represent the will of the people in the full sense of democracy. As I was saying, we are talking of coming up with constructive ideas. Some cities can't even think of this because they're at war and their citizens are being killed by the bombs, or the poverty is so extreme that they cannot even afford to think of issues such as connectivity, as our colleague from Argentina said. So this is all to say that this divide is false. We don't have international conflicts in just one part of the world. They have a global impact. This is all part of this confusion. We have a multipolar world, but not a more multilateral world. It's important. We saw in the concept note for this panel and for the forum that said, looking back at the financial mechanism and how the EU related with local governments for cooperation projects in the past, there has been a change because the world is changing. We are seeing the biggest change in model since the industrial era. No one knows where this model will go, but we know there are 3 fundamental transitions that will define the world that we will leave for future generations. That is the triple transition. The green transition, the digital transition, and social justice. This is the element we can never forget. And here, once again, I wanted to link this to the fact that the discussions that the 60 heads of state and government had in Brussels in just a few days after the meeting that my colleague Emma Kloa mentioned, the forum where we had local governments, civil society, and youth met. I just like to mention other people, as the mayor said. The will of the people is the will of the people, and it's as legit, and the council of a city council is as legitimate as the president of the government. Basically, what we heard in that forum are things that we are hearing here. Let me give you some examples from what was said at the Summit of Heads of State. President Petro from Colombia was saying that Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean must be able, through our historical ties and shared values, we must be able to achieve a decarbonized prosperity. And he reminded us all that this carbon-free prosperity must leave no one behind. President Fernandez from Argentina, President Boric from Chile said, yes, economic development is important, but we cannot afford to leave anyone behind. They made a reference to the famous lithium triangle, and we said we cannot only have extractivist projects, we can't use the outdated model, we have to bring in an added value. I think this change in culture was very interesting. 8 years had passed since the last summit, and we were talking with the Director for International Relations of the Barcelona Provincial Council a while ago, and we must acknowledge that in geopolitical terms, European Union has turned its back on Latin America in recent years. This was said by the High Representative for Foreign Policy, who's Catalan, as I am, and he's been, I could say, obsessed in correcting this geopolitical historical mistake. I think part of the problem is that we're so familiar. We have these historical ties, and sometimes this can lead to problems. We may have gone idle because we've always pulled on these shared historical ties and shared language. And during this year, other countries have occupied the space. So we are living complex times. There is no easy solution. And the message I wanted to convey here to you today, and Emma will tell you more about the cooperation programs and the cultural change in financing and the Global Gateway project. For me, the fundamental message is that by no means is the EU forgetting about local governance. It's very much part of its DNA. Local governments are part of the construct of the European Union. We cannot think of the EU without thinking about the important role of local governments. Another quote I'd like to repeat here. Sometimes we have a very narrow-minded vision on Latin America and the Caribbean, especially from Spain, because we very often forget about the 14 Caribbean states, besides Cuba and the Dominican Republic, of course, which are closer in terms of language and culture. I'd like to quote the Prime Minister, Mia Mottley. I think she was one of the few female leaders in this picture of the 60 heads of state and government, and she has led the Bridgetown Initiative, which picks up on many of the concerns expressed here, and which also includes the views of local governments on the need to reform the system to facilitate access to loans and to funds in countries. This has a deep impact on local governments. And she said, we cannot stay with the same rules of the game. We have to change the functioning of international financing mechanisms. It's unacceptable when a municipality in Ecuador or Argentina or a local government finds it more expensive to borrow internationally because of their location or because of the country they're in. This was a very powerful claim. There were very honest discussions. Europe had a clear request for an existential conflict for us, that is Russia's aggression on Ukraine, which I refer to. And if that weren't enough, now we are faced with another big geopolitical challenge where the European Union is playing an important role. We had to have an honest discussion, and we had to acknowledge that our partners from CELAC had different views on this. They didn't see Russia's aggression on the Ukraine the same as we. Many of them have condemned the events and have supported the EU and the United Nations. But they, as I said, we have many other challenges: eradication of poverty, consolidating peace in countries like Colombia, democratic transition in extremely complex countries. This was an important lesson that Europe had to listen to. It was very pedagogical. And this complexity is growing deeper with this new conflict, which places many of the so-called Western countries in a complicated situation. We are accused of using double standards. You all follow the media and know how difficult it was to come up with a common position in the EU vis-à-vis the events in Gaza. But that is where our power lies. The EU is a big democracy. It's a set of 27 member states and institutions. And to end on a positive note, I don't know, I mentioned CELAC. I don't know if I've mentioned the EU is very complex. CELAC is the group I am coordinating. It's one of the dozens of working parties that bring together these 27 member states and the institutions, the Council, the Commission, we as the Foreign Service. In our working group deals with Latin America and the Caribbean, and there we discuss all relevant issues where the EU has to come up with a position. It could be with regards to the Barbados Agreement on the issue of Venezuela, or the preparation of the summit, the peace process in Colombia. And the takeaway for me is that we must encourage a more direct presence of local governments. We will coordinate with our colleagues from the Commission. It is true that very often people that come to talk to us, they're often from civil society. We have big discussions on human rights with civil society, and we have representatives from international organizations, some of them which have an important local governance dimension. So the takeaway for me, and we want to encourage discussion with local governments. We hold discussions with 27 member states and the EU institutions at the same time. So to end on a positive note, I think the EU, more than ever before, has to stay committed and work with local governments. We all know that 60%, as Commissioner said, or Polainen said, looking into the future and the future summit, we are all wearing jacket, the SDG pins, all of us, from the largest to the smallest towns, and to the countries of the G7, are all wearing this pin. 70% of the 179 targets of the 2030 agenda, and you'll know this better than we do, cannot be implemented without the participation of local governments. It's easy to say this. I know there's a high level of frustration because very often local governments do not participate in decisions that are taken on many of these elements. And with all due respect, sitting here on a panel with 3 elected members, it's a political discussion. But as it was said here, each country is very different. There are different levels of decentralization among the 60 countries that make up CELAC and the EU. So there's important political work to be done in each of the member states. I'd leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sergi. For the wrap-up, almost, because our time is running out, but I would like to come back to especially the message that you sent, that EU is not forgetting about local governments. That is an important message, and we should keep it in our mind, even if we have lost our dedicated budget line for local governments in this financing period.
That's not exactly true, but Emma can say more to that.
But we still have hope under the new approach by the Global Gateway and the Team Europe approach, which we hope will include local governments more in the conversation and in the decision-making about investments. We know that if we just look at the OECD member states, over 40 or 50% of public investment is done by local and regional governments, not by the central governments. And of course, if we speak about investments under the Global Gateway, it's also an essential role of local governments to be present in the discussions about investments. They are the ones responsible for urban planning. They are the ones responsible for construction permits for urban investments or infrastructure investments. So how do we envisage the role of local governments under the Global Gateway? Emma.
Yo creo que en esta mesa
I believe that in this panel, almost everybody mentioned a keyword, which is the 2030 agenda, and how we are going to work to truly accomplish progress in this sense. From the European Union, it is clear that there's two significant elements that are on the table. The first one is the accomplishment of goals. It's not something individual, of public stakeholders or social stakeholders or of a different nature. It is a collective activity for all, because it is also important to talk about the gender nature and social inclusion nature for those groups who have less access, perhaps. And there's the need for a significant mobilization of stakeholders. The second element is that not only we need to mobilize everybody from a comprehensive perspective, it is important to mobilize investment as well, and not only public investment, but also private investment. The Global Gateway basically tries to precisely bring to the table this need for investment and mobilization of stakeholders with a perspective of 360 degrees. So, complete and comprehensive way of how to make progress through big goals that can sound very macro: digital transition, green transition with all the transport elements it has, and human development as well, reinforcing healthcare. We spoke about the pandemic, but also education and all aspects related to inclusion and social integration. This may sound like macro goals, but at the end of the day, they have a very specific landing if we truly want to make progress. If we look at the Global Gateway agenda in Latin America and the Caribbean, it is full of actions and proposals that, in truth, have a local landing and implementation. We're talking about the metro of Bogota. We're talking about water and sanitation structures in several countries, in Quito. In other places, we're talking about local transportation in Costa Rica, in San Jose. These are not just proposals that are up in the air. They require mobilization of many stakeholders, of course, but local authorities are included among them. And I believe that in the Global Gateway Forum, as Boris was saying 2 weeks ago, the importance of having these dialogue platforms was put forward, dialogue with civil society and local authorities, to precisely have this opinion, to provide a role to the decision-making mechanisms, and then simultaneously to see how in the operation of the flagships and the Global Gateway proposals, how can it done in the best possible way so that this proximity element is reflected in the investments, but not only in the investments, but in all the Europe team proposals for accompaniment. And here we have cooperation indeed, but also other partnership actions as well. The Global Gateway states so that it accomplishes an essential role, which is part of the added value in Europe, which is precisely not only to bring investment, but investment that is sustainable, that is fair, So a democracy dimension, human rights, respect for rights, including employment rights and human rights, and that it can truly contribute to a development, not only in the investment, but also with an effect in public policies and in the citizenship of the countries with which partnerships have been established. Obviously, there are accompaniments as well with programs that are already ongoing, EU-CELAC, Euroclimate, other projects that also work with peace and stability components, which are important for the global gateway, so as to have security not only for investment, but also for citizens, that are full of specific examples on how to work with local authorities. In Eurosocial, for instance, we have worked a lot on decentralization of state, territorialization, territorial rebalancing, and how to work on vulnerabilities, including social vulnerabilities. With Euroclimate, we have also worked a lot on different aspects related to supporting capacity building so that the climate change agenda becomes a reality, but also with very specific pilot projects that allows us to work in Cuba, for instance, with local authorities to develop the climate agenda in countries such as Chile, Peru, and some others. So there is a true landing, a territorial landing in the countries, but it has a multidimensional perspective, and it's important for us to stress that because we believe it is of utmost relevance. These platforms are not only the global platforms as the one I've mentioned, the Global Gateway Discussion Platform or the Policy Forum for Development, which is the space where local authorities can have an influence or have an opinion in the priorities that are worked on at cooperation levels with multi-annual plans. We are also inviting everyone to establish a discussion at the level of the delegations of the European Union to see how local authorities and other entities can support and make us move forward with the implementation of Global Gateway, but then at the same time become involved in programs that are precisely aimed at working on the three transitions, the digital, the green transition, and as the Commissioner Urpilain said in the Civil Society Forum and local authorities, work on the social environment, which continues to be an essential element for our social cohesion. And social cohesion is a supporting stakeholder, amongst others, in terms of public policies and how this reaches citizens. We're going to work in this next period a lot on this in the framework of our new Inclusive Societies program, and we believe that at any rate, all this work of public policies and social policies for the protection, social protection, social inclusion. This includes a very relevant thing Marcela mentioned before, employment. So accessing employment and how can vulnerable groups can access transition so that they are fair, and everything that is done with Global Gateway, Team Europe, and initiatives can have a positive impact not only in the citizens of Latin America and the Caribbean, but also in the partnership with the European Union. There is an interest in reinforcing these relationships and work jointly so that we can go beyond in this multilateral panorama, but also in the multi-level scope, and this includes everything that is local.
Much. That was very concrete in the end. We came up to concrete elements and concrete places where we can discuss, where we can jointly do the planning, where we can jointly do let's say the envisioning of the future and the processes that are going on the way. And especially thank you for highlighting the need to discuss with European Union delegations. I've said we've lost a dedicated budget line. We haven't lost it completely because the funding is still there, except it's decentralized, it's territorialized, European Union delegations. So they are now the ones to play the key role, speak with local actors, speak with local governments, local government associations in specific countries to understand the needs and to discuss about programming, about priorities, about the future. And last but not least, let me underline one more specific instrument which we have from the European Commission, which is called Framework Partnership Agreements, as the Commission is really supporting key networks of local regional governments to support decentralized cooperation and to support global cooperation of cities and regions. So thank you, Commission, for that. It's quite an important instrument. And this instrument helps us to learn how to localize policies. We started with the Agenda 2030 with Sustainable Development Goals, and you probably know, all of you, how much effort we put into localizing these global agendas, localizing these global policies, and understand how they play at the local level and what can the local level do to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. I wonder whether we come to the part where the audience has now the chance to ask questions to our panelists, so I let the coordinator and the moderator of the bigger event to take the floor.
Thank you. Muchas gracias por...
Thank you so much for keeping to the time. We had started slightly late, but we are on time, so thank you so much for that. The time has come now to make contributions. So from the audience, I can see several hands, 3, 4, 5 hands raised. So please, let's get started here. To this side, please.
Perdón.
Apologies. I would like to remind you to introduce yourselves when you speak, please.
And thank you very much for allowing the Caribbean this opportunity to bring the voice of the region and to allay to some measures the concern raised by the EU about the region not being very vocal at these fora. So I represent the Caribbean region of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, and I want to reassure you at the level of the EU that we are indeed very gratified for the support that we have been receiving through the Framework Partnership Agreement referred to by our representative of Platforma. Moreover, in addition to that, we have been working collaboratively with the missions in the region. The mission assigned to Barbados, and that services the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, as well as the mission assigned to Trinidad and Tobago, where CLGF Caribbean is located. In addition to that, I want to refer to the issue raised by Marcella concerning decent work and youth unemployment. And again, to express the gratitude of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, the Caribbean region, for the support that we have been receiving in the region. We have had the approval of the EU for a 36-month project that would address the question of school-to-work transitioning through vocational education. And that project, when implemented, would service the subnational regions in 4 Commonwealth Caribbean islands. And we would be open to a partnership from participants here for co-funding to support the delivery of vocational education to address the skills gap existing in the Caribbean. And I should probably let you know that if you embrace this opportunity, you would be able to learn, as we say, from the either North-South Cooperation or South-South Cooperation on how we intend to pursue this initiative. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And if I didn't say my name, it is Sandra Singh, representing the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, the Caribbean region. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. Any comments to what Ms. Singh said? So, Mr. Farre?
And again, so it's an honor to have someone from the Commonwealth here as well. And I think this is very important. You mentioned the South-South cooperation, and I think I referred to it earlier, that we actually, we sometimes Latin America proper doesn't look to the Caribbean enough, and you actually facing certain challenges. We talked about climate change. I think there's very few other, well, there's other islands in the world, but in Latin America, a few other countries like those in the Caribbean that are facing an existential threat with climate change. And I quoted Mia Motley, and also because she's become a world leader on these issues. But I just wanted to commend you, and I'm very happy that you're here, and I encourage also this networking. We know that Dominican Republic has acted as a, sort of a pivotal country, trying to have this closer cooperation. I'm very glad this is also happening at the government level. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. You have the floor. Good morning. Luz Amparo Medina, Director of International Relationships of Bogota. I would like to give you a global perspective of this global gateway in terms of resources and intention. For the recovery of COVID, the EU invested in Europe over 2 trillion euros. And the investment devoted to Global Gateway, which precisely covers 60 countries in this cooperation strategy between EU and CELAC, is 45 billion euros. So there's a clear disproportion. And yes, the message is a very good one, and we would like to acknowledge it and congratulate it and be truly thankful for it. But it is a truly modest effort in the face of the size and the ambition it has. The ambition is not only to tackle the 3 transitions we've already mentioned, but more importantly so, it is to respond to the new Chinese Silk Road, and there is a geostrategical new element in here. And coming from Bogota, I can tell you that local governments are the true scenario of that geopolitical tension. A few minutes ago, you mentioned that part of the resources of Global Gateway are for the second line of the Bogota Metro, and that's true. The European Investment Bank is accompanying the investment of the metro line. And in the meetings we've had have helped us to structure the technical, social, and environmental structure of all this with the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. And this is a project that, structurally speaking, goes along the principles and the rules of the game of the 4 stakeholders. Despite this, in the pre-qualification of signatures, there were 3 Chinese signatures and 1 Spanish signature. And there's a huge tension there, a huge tension. So if we play along the rules of the game existing today, and if Chinese companies comply with them and pass with all the environmental safeguards, the social and technical safeguards, and we're receiving such a high level of pressure against Chinese companies, I believe that we need to think about where to carry out transformations or transitions and who to give this help. Not only local governments, but also European companies. We need to adjust instruments to respond to this, not on the weak side, but rather from the economic and private stakeholders in Europe, so they are equally competitive and can have a very important achievement in open tenders that are open, transparent, and also compliant with the transparency lines imposed by these international stakeholders. And finally, I would like to call your attention upon the fact that, or what must we do to improve the relative weights of local governments in this global conversation. The resources available need to go by national governments at all times, especially when they are opposed to local governments, and this becomes something political. It is not just technical. And this is not only complex from the management side of things, but it also comes against time. The 2030 agenda, well, we're 7 years away from 2030 and very far away from complying with the goals, and time is the most limiting factor. This is just a reflection I wanted to bring to the forum. Thank you so much. Thank you. I don't know whether there are any comments on the table. Thank you, Amparo, for your reflection, because for us, it is very well known that the European Union is a global stakeholder in terms of international trade, and what this means abiding by the rules of the game. So transparency criteria, competitiveness criteria, and also criteria that are related to something that the EU has been pushing forward in recent years, which is also social responsibility of companies, both in the defense of international legislation in labor rights, but also in other aspects. So if there's something Global Gateway brings, but also European investment based on the statistics that we have, is added value. They are not only investments, they are investments that come along with a series of parameters and quality standards, but also social and environmental standards that are increasingly being reinforced, because also the EU policies and the member states' policies are walking along those lines and are aligned in global commitments such as the Agreement of Paris, for instance, but some others as well. So it is true that we also work in a competitive environment with other competitors. China is one, but there is also others. But in the framework of Global Gateway, precisely, we are having an added value offer, and also working with the private sector for public policy purposes, so purposes that go beyond whatever is simply commercial or investments that we would have anyway, but we want them to come under some parameters, and we are strengthening this dynamic and this discussion precisely to make it not purposeful for all, but also accomplishing with this ambition of the 2030 agenda. And I believe it is important to stress this, because we're not talking about any type of investment. We'll see many different types of investments, and beyond Global Gateway and along private criteria with many stakeholders, Global Gateway precisely wants to stress this fact of added value. Obviously, if there's a spillover or profit in the private sector and public sector, or even in the social aspect of non-governmental entities, we see this as something positive, but the stress precisely comes in the alignment with the 2030 goals and added value work in order to reach a social dimension of public policies. Thank you. You have the floor.
Buenos días.
Good morning. I'm Celine Papa, Vice Mayoress in Bordeaux, and also in Cité Unie France, President of Cité Unie France in France. I would like to stress 3 points very quickly. First, the context of decentralized cooperation, because obviously it is not the same in Spain and in other European countries, as Spain has a natural approach in terms of decentralized cooperation with Latin America, which might be less obvious in other European countries. It is true that the geopolitical context is changing our cooperations a lot, but I truly believe that it is necessary for us to have mechanisms and incentives to also that other local governments in Europe can become interested in all the different potentialities with Latin America and the Caribbean. My second message would be the role of these decentralized cooperation in the strategy, as stressed by the mayor of Alicante. The support to private investment is essential, and in terms of startups or small companies, political power of local governments is also crucial in decentralized cooperation projects. We work a lot with these companies, and I believe that in this, we need support with these, solidarity funds that we have in France in terms of water management and waste management. This is a mechanism that works really well and should also, or could also, be developed at a European scale to support us in our cooperation projects through perhaps a mechanism such as we saw in Urbal in the past, implemented at a European scale. And then finally, a third message is that we need, I know you're convinced about this, but we need to work more on Team Europe and this cooperation. We're already working a lot with FDE in many places, but also in terms of decentralized cooperation, we could very likely coordinate our actions better between and amongst the different local governments. And in terms of urban-rural cooperation, there would likely be very good potentialities between the different local governments, perhaps a city in France with an autonomous region in Spain. There's possibilities of working more on this urban-rural connection with the different projects and be more effective on the field. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ms. Marcela? Yes, I simply want to say, well, firstly, I would like to agree with or adhere to the contribution from Bogota. Well, I trust that the colleagues here in the panel from the European Union have noted down all your suggestions. Regarding what Celine was saying now about Bordeaux, I truly want to reinforce, you made me remember the Urbal program. This was indeed a program that offered many outcomes, and we also assessed and identified the weaknesses later, with the intention of rethinking about this type of programs to give it a new meaning, and that's where it stayed without effectively providing any new meaning. But France, as a country, well, my city, Tandil, has a cooperation with Clermont-Ferrand with a very strong effort by the French government. And it is involving not only local governments, but also in this associated logic strategy. As I was saying before, there's no development without enterprises, there's no development without workers, there's no development without innovation, and there's no development without funds. So these are the four great pillars of a concept, and I'm just being very simplistic. But France, for Argentina, is one of the countries that accompanies the most in decentralized cooperation, and I wish next year, or in a very near future, we can say it's not only France, but the entire European Union accompanying these projects that are so visible and empirical, specific projects that make this decentralized cooperation in the different territories, and also networks. We have lots of them here. We've been asked to create networks for everything, but watch out with this as well. There's more networks than people, almost. There's too many networks of people. And that's all fine and well. We need to work as a network, and we need to be solidary. We need to generate collective action. But hey, perhaps we just overstepped if we look at the snapshot of networks at the beginning of the 21st century, and we look at a picture of networks now. I'm in the network of capital cities of my region, of the different sectors in my region, and a network was created for this as well. So let's watch out with this and not have too many networks, because this will mean weakening for the future. Thank you.
Did you want to react? Yes, just a minute. Well, I wanted to mention that we must trust local governments. We are a local government of a middle-sized city, and we are able to link up with municipalities and parishes, but also with the private sector, social and popular economies, SMEs. Going back to the rural area, and bearing in mind that Ecuador has a trade agreement with Europe, this trade agreement is an important instrument in terms of generating agricultural employment in rural areas. We must also remember this trade agreement because through cooperation with private actors and the Association of Small-Scale Food Producers, we can contribute to creating jobs, agricultural jobs, and help overcome many of the social issues. Yes, Mr. Barcada, you have the floor now. Yes, I fully agree. I mean, the problem isn't who suggests creating a network. I think the problem is who accepts the creation of a network and who funds the network. That is where we need a control. Anyone can have an interest in setting up a network. I can set up my neighborhood network, which, by the way, exists. And it exists for the simple reason that in my neighborhood, there's a group of neighbors who have their own claims, and they set up a network. I don't know, when you mentioned the network of knife manufacturers, I don't know what that will yield, but in Alicante, the network of nougat producers leads to billions of euros. So you can, I mean, the name we give it is irrelevant. It's what it yields. So I think it's legitimate for people who share common issues and look for common solutions to try and come up with spaces where they can solve these issues. At the same time, those of us who hold the responsibility to agree to the creation of networks and, most importantly, to fund these networks, it is important that we have a clear set of criteria to know why this network is set up, what is the purpose, or what is the real benefit in creating these networks. And with the application of new technologies, it's not that difficult to manage these networks. I think this forum is essential. It's essential that we can meet and talk to each other face to face. But I'm sure there are many other networks can work in a virtual way. We've learned a lot about this. And, you know, there's the cost of the holding these meetings, or the maintenance costs would be reduced if things are done virtually. We have great events, big fora, where we talk of many things. And if we add up the travel cost of plane tickets and hotels and all the rest, we may have left a bit of CO2 footprint, so maybe we should be a bit more coherent. Thank you. I see someone else asking for the floor here at the front. Hi, good morning. I'm Maria Base from the metropolitan area of Barcelona. I wanted to ask a specific question. For years now, the local institutions, municipal and supra-municipal institutions, have been working through direct and peer-to-peer cooperation with other local institutions similar to ours, with institutions that have to solve and overcome the same challenges and issues. We've learned a lot about horizontal decolonized way of working. And I think one of the instruments we are using, since we're referring to the European Union, is that we have financial support programs for local authorities that allowed us to have stronger projects and allowed us to delve deeper into some of the aspects we were working on and achieve a substantial change. This instrument, we've been told, will no longer exist this year and will be managed by the national headquarters. And we've seen two problems to this. Maybe the EU has already thought about this and come up with solutions, and you could share them with us. One of the problems is that it'll all depend on the countries where these resources will be going to. It'll depend on the governmental dialogues, whether or not these funds will be implemented at a local level. In some countries, it may be easy to do this job. And for other countries, we don't have as much certainty as to whether the funds will trickle down to the local institutions. The other question is, how are we going to strengthen the relationships between local institutions in the EU and local institutions from Latin America. We've been working for many years and we've built strong relationships. It's good to have support from the EU to have a qualitative leap forward. So I'd also like to say that we are working on cooperation projects. I think in this case, we're working with 2 metropolitan areas, but we also working in different territories from the Latin America and the Caribbean and European institutions too, with metropolitan areas in France, for instance. Okay, we are running out of time, but if you would like to respond to this intervention, there are 2 more questions we will take, but this one maybe requires a very specific answer from our European representatives. Yes?
I will try to reply very briefly, but also quite conceptually, because this discussion gave us a lot to fill in the puzzle on where we are. Decentralized cooperation by itself is an instrument towards achieving something, and towards achieving what, we have come to a conclusion that the Sustainable Development Goals are worth going for, to be the objective where we want to go together. And we spoke a lot about this new poly-crisis world, where we have a crisis climatic, human, political, all around the world. So we are trying to reinvent decentralized cooperation as a tool with new approaches. You mentioned South-South cooperation, triangular cooperation, urban-rural cooperation, city networks. We see the immediate need to start being around the table all together, starting to coordinate, starting to look for synergies, for concrete results, so that we can go forward together as local regional governments. And we rely a lot on partnerships. And the one with the European Union is a key partnership for us. We see the EU not only as a donor, but as a policymaker, which is quite an important aspect for us towards coming forward together. And we need to start looking and developing our geographic coordination, thematic coordination. That's why these networks are very useful, but also starting to work more constructively, proactively with the private sector, international donors, national government, civil society. We see this multi-actor world, and it looks like this is the answer to the poly-crisis, to work with partners, to work with true partnerships at the same level. That's why we also try to work with the EU delegations on the ground, with the EU institutions in Brussels, with the European Commission, with the External Service, with the Council, with the European Parliament, to bring all these voices together around one table and speak as equal partners with all of you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. We have 2 further requests, and with that, we'll wrap up this panel. I'm Aide Castillo. I'm a human rights defender. I'm from civil society in Nicaragua. I'd like to thank you for this extremely interesting panel. I had 2 questions, in fact. My first question is the following. What does the 2030 agenda and all this new investment program envisage in terms of civil society? We have strong concerns with what is happening in Central America. It's not just Nicaragua. In Honduras, in Guatemala, also in Costa Rica and El Salvador, we are seeing a rapid deterioration of the relationships between governments and civil society. And they're also wiping out civil society in some cases. In the case of Nicaragua, almost 4,000 civil society organizations, not just human rights organizations, but also cultural, educational, health organizations, have been dismantled by the government. And This is closely linked to what Mr. Luis was saying and Marcela and our colleague from Bogota. When we create all of these superstructures, but the fundamental, essential dialogue should be with the citizens of a neighborhood, of a community, of a region, or municipality, or a country, or region. When there is no dialogue with the citizens, where are we headed? That's my first question. And there I think it's essential to have a program that is funded to build capacities and to have social audits to empower societies to allow them to come up with proposals coming from civil society. That is what will ultimately benefit a municipality and the territory. My second question has to do with alignment. I remember that in the previous EU strategy there was a mention on as to how cooperation had to be aligned with national and municipal plans to reduce poverty. We are faced with a problem, and that is that there is no connection between what is planned at a global level with what is planned at a national level, and not to mention at a regional level. I would say the Central American integration system is experiencing a strong crisis. So my concrete question is, how can we ensure that planning is aligned starting from a local level, reaching an international level? Thank you. Thank you so much. And Ms. Caravantes, you have the final word. Thank you so much. I'm Lily Caravantes, City Councillor of the City of Guatemala. Along the lines of the first question asked by the person taking the floor before me, I think having a civil society forum that support local matters should be held. We need a multiplicity of voices so that all of those voices coming from civil society that are pushing for change to also be heard. I also have a question with regards to the indicators that are used and the criteria for cooperation. In this sense, Guatemala is a middle-income country. It's a middle-income country, but with huge inequalities. Guatemala is the third global exporter of sugar, but we are also the third country with largest number of people suffering from chronic malnutrition. Malnutrition that affects more than 50% of the population. 60% of the population before the pandemic lived in poverty. So when we use indicators to measure inequalities and not just economic indicators, must be a criteria when you decide who is eligible for cooperation funds. And we have to listen to the different voices and take stock of the different realities in local governments. Thank you. Maybe Mr. Petantonio would like to answer. Would anyone else from the panel like to react to some of the questions? Yes? Well, I'll be very brief. Thank you so much for your contributions. Yesterday, just so that we can continue discussing about this, our colleague from Guatemala is repeating something that was mentioned here by a colleague from Uruguay, and that is wealth distribution. cooperation should be a tool and an instrument for more equitable wealth distribution. And you gave a very concrete example, and there are thousands others, not just in Latin America and Central America, also in Europe, where there are strong inequalities. My second comment is that obviously the criteria has to be bottom up. Development happens bottom up, but we still try to impose development from a top-down approach. Our colleague from Bogota was mentioning this centralization of funding. Territories have no autonomy. I'm talking of a territory as a geographical space that has been socially constructed, where the local government, together with unions and others, is just one more stakeholder. So we must find a way. And I know that our colleagues from the European Union have a political view on how to develop instruments where the logics of cooperation bring us together in the logic of a co-constructed territory, and to look at the needs rising from the bottom and not the needs of those sitting at the top. Thank you. I don't know if Mr. Ferran has a brief comment. If not, we would give Mr. Tom Hauser the floor to wrap up. If it's possible, I'd like Emma Clua to answer these questions, if possible. Okay. I'll give it a try then. 3 points to pick up on the conversations. It is clear that there is a whole debate around how to fit in the situations in middle and high income countries into the whole discussion on how to combat inequality. And there's also a big discussion about partnerships, international cooperation, and multi-stakeholderism, I think, can contribute to this debate. But at the same time, we need to have a structural dynamic in countries, and they should make active policies to correct those inequalities. And in a very complex global situation with multiple crises and the post-pandemic era, this means that we have to enter into uncomfortable debates on taxation and how can we adopt policies that are not just well-funded, but are also adequate to overcome inequalities. And it's not up to the international partners to hold these discussions. These are discussions to be taken up by countries, regions, and all of the different authorities and governments. This is true for Latin America, it's true for the Caribbean, it's also true for the European Union, where we are working hard to correct the long-standing inequalities with a series of European regulations, national laws, and at a decentralized level. It's important not to lose sight of this perspective. Partnerships are useful, but at the end of the day, as we rightly said, there's some work for each of us to do, and we all have to row in the same direction. Having said that, it is true that the ongoing dialogues at different levels, and indeed, as Idea was saying, civil society plays an important role, not just in defending human rights and democracy. Civil society also plays a role in defining public policy and in participating in dialogue, not just in Latin America and the Caribbean or Europe, but also in other regions. Local authorities have proven to be some of the best allies of civil society, to give them access and to open up spaces of participation and dialogue. Maybe because of political situations or other times, it may be more complex to open spaces at a national level, but they can be opened up at a local level around specific themes. I think it's something that deserves greater exploration or greater exploring. And referring to what Celine was mentioning, which I found extremely interesting, at the level of cooperation, there are many different approaches to cooperation. What's important is to capitalize on the partnerships with the support of the European Commission, but also with bilateral support from other teams, other countries in Teams Europe, or other groups that may work along the same lines to work on the different themes from different perspectives. We chose among our priorities to adopt a geographical perspective, but there are other more horizontal ways like thematic lines, issues of decentralized cooperation for member states, or there are programs like Adelante at the regional level, which allow us to work on these common elements in a more dedicated way. Thank you. Thank you so much for the effort of summarizing. Mr. Van Housen, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the floor. I try to summarize this rich debate. It's very complicated. We have gone through so many topics, so many issues, so many ways. Maybe I would like to recall declaration that we as local regional governments have adopted in July. It's still valid, it's still on the table, and we'll still try to put it forward, saying what we need as a tool are resources, guidance, and discussion fora. For resources, we really are looking towards the NDK, definitely, in terms of its geographic but thematic instruments as well. This is for us the key instrument that brings resources to the table. Of course, multi-stakeholder bioregional instruments that we try to see on the table. In terms of guidance, we are very keen on being part of the Global Gateway, of being part of the Team Europe initiatives. We're working on that in Brussels, but I'm sure we'll have to do a lot of work on the ground as well, together with the EU delegations to make this happen. We have fora such as EU-Mercosur, EU-CARICOM, so we have different fora to bring in the views and opinions and the needs of local regional governments. We have the Local Regional Government Forum, obviously, which we will continue in 2025 at the next round of the bi-regional meetings between the EU and the Latin America and Caribbean. We have decentralized cooperation as a key tool to bring people together, to bring local governments together, to work together on different issues, and we spoke about these issues. We spoke about this crisis, about these issues. But in the end, we want to claim a joint space together, European local governments, Latin American local governments, civil society organizations, to create a framework, enabling environment for all of us to work together. We spoke a lot about coordination. We spoke a lot about synergies which are needed at this point. And last but not least, what we need and what we want is true partnership with all the stakeholders that are on the ground. We speak a lot about multi-stakeholder approach, local regional governments, their national associations, their international networks are a key stakeholder that can amalgamate the voice and the needs of local governments who are in touch with the local populations, who can represent the needs on the ground. So in this way, we don't want just a box-ticking exercise, but a true partnerships with all the partners that are on the ground. And I'm sure that this can leverage the value-based offer that the EU is putting on the table and to which local regional governments subscribe for the future.
Sí, el señor Ferrer ahora sí tiene una cosa.
I think Mr. Ferrer would like to add one thing. Yes, this explanation on the regulatory steps. Well, I'm taking a guess here because it'll be up to the ministers to decide. But what started off with a joint statement on the 7th July for a new EU-Latin America relationship was followed by the summit of local governments, and it will conclude, and that is how these initiatives and relaunches start, with the conclusions of the Council, which will be presented by the High Representative on November 21st, I think. We're not the little brothers, but I would encourage you to read through these conclusions. I'm taking a guess here, but I am guessing there will be a reference to all of this among the conclusions to the role of local governments. And don't quote me on this, but pay attention. I'm sure the conclusions will be shared on 21st November. Great. With that additional point of information, we can go for a coffee and take a rest. We will convene back in the room at 11:30. Thank you.